Hello and welcome. Season 5, Episode 7 of Dualistic Unity. I am uncertainty. And every time I make the assumption that I'm not, that it's not inherent to what I am, to everything that I'm going through, it just fucks me right up every single time because I'm always that uncertainty. It's not even that I'm something that's uncertain. I am literally uncertainty unfolding.
And by virtue of that, the entirety of the Dualistic Unity podcast is uncertainty unfolding. And that's one of the things I enjoy about the experience of recording this is that we go into it embracing the uncertainty of the entire episode because we never know what we're going to talk about. And so we don't know what Dualistic Unity, the podcast, is. You could call it a podcast, but now there's the community aspect, and then there's the intention behind that. And then there's the small conversations that happen within the community. So what is Dualistic Unity? Frankly, we just don't know. But that said, we have to be able to describe it to people in one way or another. And I've been asked recently, how do you do that? And I'll be the first to say, frankly, I don't know. However, it comes to you at the time, depending on who you're talking to. Trust yourself. But what's funny is that people would categorize us as a religion and spirituality podcast or even a society podcast, despite the fact that we're not really talking about either of those things, except in how they are affected by the role of identity and the role of the illusion that we invest in. The reason I bring this up is because Dualistic Unity, for a second year now, is in the People's Choice Podcast Awards for 2023. We are in the categories of religion and spirituality and society, which is really, really funny. But again, we'll keep the joke to ourselves. If you would like to support us, please join podcastawards.com. Vote for us. Just register. It's absolutely free. It takes about 5 minutes, and then you can vote for us in either of those two categories. The awards aren't until September, so there's lots and lots of time, but we would really appreciate the help. And that was really all I wanted to cover quickly within the introduction. Today, we're going to be joined by one of our more avid community members. He's been around for a while. He's been chatting with us. We recently had the opportunity to meet him in person. Anybody who has been in the community for a while will, of course know Rainer. Rainer, before we get too far into this, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you ended up here on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Pleasure for sure. And the retreat was amazing a couple weeks ago, which ultimately led to this. So yeah, I've been listening to the podcast probably since the start of it. I even listened to Andrew's podcast a little prior to him getting into DU and starting DU. And I remember seeing it and seeing the title and be like, oh, that's interesting. Like thinking at the time very much like, oh, I don't listen to spiritual podcasts. I don't listen to all this, just creating prison walls around myself as to what I do and what I don't do. But yeah, it's been quite a ride just letting shit go.
Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, dude. I didn't know that you'd listened to my podcast before. It's been fun, kind of that transition. It's almost like that because I haven't really thought about that in a while. Like I don't post on it anymore. There was a little bit of overlap where I had some guests on that after Dualistic Unity started, but it is kind of like cool. I don't know. I just find it cool that like a lot of the things I've been through and the insights and stuff have been documented. So it's almost like a prequel to Dualistic Unity. And then I think there was one episode I know that I specifically filmed like right after I kind of recognized that the story of Andrew isn't the reality of what I am. And so you could start to see the shift, and then came across Ray's stuff, and then Dualistic Unity all kicked in. But yeah, it's been quite the process, quite the journey. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and kind of, I guess, some of maybe your initial recognitions, and maybe if it's certain experiences that you had and certain things that you initially let go of, or if there was anything that came up early on that was more of a jarring recognition, or if it's been you kind of slowly unfolding, digging deeper into just the recognition of uncertainty and letting go of all of the assumptions that you had about yourself over, the last couple of years, and I guess more or less your entire life.
No, for sure. Interestingly enough, it kind of started out at a very similar time to when you started recognizing that you weren't what you think. So I've always joked to kind of in the sense that like, oh, has Instagram algorithm just like heard me talking about this shit and directs me to Andrew, no fucking idea. But at the time is funny when I originally started getting into this conversation, or I guess more specifically just recognizing that I wasn't an idea or wasn't what I thought I was. I would say I was going through a pretty turbulent period of my life, as many are at that time, I would say. And I was going to therapy. This was, I want to say 2020 or something like that. Um, and the therapist had given me like these like exercises, and they're essentially, it was like CBT exercises to essentially untwist thinking. So it was like, look at a particular pattern that you're doing and question it. And what he was like simply doing is just saying, question that, question that, question that. And I got carried away, no doubt. But to the extent that it was funny, I kind of questioned myself out of existence to some extent. And ultimately kind of came to the recognition that, nobody, like, that you're not your name, and that nobody is any different in the sense that they're all having a dualistic experience, and essentially very much surrounding the like conversations around like fame or clout and stuff like that. I've been like, wow, what the fuck is that? Like, you are literally just the same thing. And it was interesting because it was so freeing in the sense that went I would say I kind of swung to the reckless side of things after that. Like, kind of got out of my own way and very much was living for this, like, I'm not real, it doesn't matter, can do anything I want. And we all know where that goes as well. So anyway, it was just, it's interesting because it's just been a like, I would say there's been like two considerable releases, in the sense of like the first being what I just described, and then the second being a more profound, I would say, experience in recognizing that you don't exist at all, and I guess essentially that you're everything. And from there, really, it's been just an unraveling of, you think you know something, and nope, you think you know, nope, nope, just over and over and over, and those concepts just like melting away over whatever period of time. And it's and I would say that now, and especially after this particular retreat too, I'd say that the thing that I'm mostly chewing on is essentially that I don't need anything. And I had a road trip with some friends that you guys are well aware of afterward, and that was a perfect example of just, you don't need anything. Like, you don't need any of the shit that you think you do. You think you need to shower twice a day. You think you need to eat 3 meals a day. You think you need to, work this amount a day and do this amount a day. Like, those experiences certainly blow that shit out of the water. So anyway, just yeah, very grateful for where it's gone, and excited to continue to just destroy the walls.
Hell yeah. I love something that you were saying there early on, that you kind of got carried away with the questioning. And we were talking about this earlier and before the episode, that as you go along this journey and you start to peel apart your walls, you start to peel apart, your assumptions and things like that, it starts to dawn on you, in fact, that even the process of questioning all of those things is still the avoidance of just arriving at where you are. And so there's a value in the questioning, but there's also the capacity for avoidance in the questioning, in terms of using the struggle for self-awareness as a means of avoiding the responsibility of self-awareness. And so I really enjoyed the way that you said that you can get carried away in the questioning too. And we've seen that before in the Discord and the community. I've seen that in myself, because it's fun. It's fun to question. It's fun to rip things apart and see that underneath it all, the concepts just aren't the truth whatsoever. But on the other hand, you can get so lost in that you forget what is reality, which is you, here and now, whatever that might be.
Yeah, it's funny because this is something that hit me last couple of weeks, and anyone who's been keeping up with the Raws and the social episodes, especially, like something that hit me out of this last retreat that we had that Rainer was at was that I kind of had this assumption, or at least I realized I was settling upon that sort of mentality as being the answer, like questioning everything. And not even that, because I hadn't really glommed onto that too hard, but there was a perspective of seeing things as not being what you think that quote unquote was it. And that's the answer. And it was, I think, as that got sort of stripped out or taken out from under me, I realized that that's not it either. And there isn't a thing. There's not a thing you can settle on as it. Like, as I started this one out with your uncertainty unfolding. And even that's in question, but uncertainty is just a word. So like the pointer is kind of irrelevant if you're willing to actually look at it. Communication is a two-way street. Important to keep that in mind. I feel like I'm responding to an Instagram comment right now. Someone getting caught on, oh, your idea of nothing being an idea is just an idea. And it's like, no, it's actually not when you actually look at it, but you can make the assumption that it is. And so there was some discomfort combined with freedom in that, almost as always, was recognizing that that's not something you can settle upon either. And so there's not even something to hold. It's just that's that state of freedom. Like freedom can't be something that you settle upon. And I think there's just like layer upon layer, depth upon depth of things that we think must be it. It's like even when you recognize that, you can say that, but it's still like, yeah, but it's got to be. There's got to be something. It's like it's not even that, and so it's just the continued process of being what is. And so that, as uncomfortable as that was, as you let go of those assumptions as well, you start to find out more and more of what you're capable of. And every time some assumption comes up, it's like you realize that's not it either. And they come up moment to moment too. It's fascinating to see them come up. You feel a little feeling inside of you. We make an assumption that, oh, it means this. Oh, it means that. And you don't even know that. And so it's just continuing to allow yourself to unfold. So to finish this off with another question with you kind of realizing more and more, has there been anything more recently that has been jarring in that way that you kind of realized you were glomming onto it, even just a tiny bit, that was causing a little bit of friction or resistance between yourself and the reality that you were experiencing? And how was that, if so?
No, no, I'm joking. But it's funny, like one in particular that comes to mind is just like clinging to any insight, right? And it's like it's and I almost like think of it synonymous to assumptions, right? Because you like have a particular insight that's, like I said, say like that you're not where you think, or you have the recognition of unity or something, and then you essentially cling to it, and that's what every religion has ever done ever, right? So I think just generally not clinging to insights, but it's been an interesting balance in some sense, because and this is getting to a little bit of a side note, but I'll get into it anyway. But in the past I had really seen the value in letting things go, but didn't know why. And it was essentially like very much aligned with trying to build like this perfect idea of myself and trying to fulfill what, your parents want, what other people tell you you should be, right? And so while I was definitely very much tied up in the idea of myself, I was still, recognizing like, oh, letting go and moving on, the temporal nature of everything, like those slight insights, and you can settle on like, this makes me feel good. This is, good. I'm going to continue doing this, right? And it's just the double-edged sword of identity, right? Like one that I'd use in particular is just like letting go of letting go in general. And that's something I almost come back to monthly, if I'm in a sense that like I'll have this idea that removing things, removing layers, like getting rid of things is essentially allowing me to experience freedom when they never owned me to begin with, right? And it was just that I was letting them own me as opposed to not just not letting shit own you.
And that's very much the point, is that you recognize that the journey changes as you keep going. Like at first it's like, oh my God, all of this stuff is weighing me down, I got to let it go. And then later on you realize, oh, it was my attachment to the stuff that was weighing me down. The stuff could have stayed. And it changes very much your perspective of what you're doing and why. And then all of a sudden you're just not buying as much stuff. You can let stuff go or not. It's not really influencing you because you're in a state of aware responsibility. Which is why I want to come back to your road trip, because as you said, the insights are useful, helpful, even very exciting. But as soon as you hold on to them as being the point, you get lost. You become all cerebral and intellectual, and you're basically just, is basically just intellectual masturbation. And so the real meat of all of this is in the shit, is in the moment to moment stuff. That's where you get to see and practice everything that you've been. And so in a road trip, especially, I think it's great because you get to deal with what would normally be your day-to-day preferences, your normal day-to-day routine, and it's just not there. And things aren't going the way you want them to. Sometimes things aren't the ideal. Sometimes things just go half-assed backwards entirely, and you are left with the moment-to-moment responsibility of either making the most of it or letting it, let me reword that, or deciding it's going to drag you down. And that's the practice. That's the only thing that really matters out of all of this. It's the practice of living. It really is. And it's so funny how it gets turned into psychology and religion and philosophy and all that shit. And really all we're talking about is being alive with less conflict.
Yeah, it's really just, am I concerned? Like, this is coming up. Maybe I've had a preference about this in the past. It's not meeting that preference. Like, am I overlaying a concern about a thing that I'm experiencing, about a thing that I'm going through? And it's always that right there. And I think an overarching mentality, and one that we're kind of seeing because we're getting back to posting some older videos that tend to stir people up quite a bit in regards to something people strongly identify with and just assumptions that people make, is that concern about something that's being said, and like, how much is that, are you going to allow that to impact you, and how much of the thing happening in a certain way are you going to let weigh you down? And it's just a moment to moment experience always. And it's funny to see it kind of bubble up, because I'm starting to build more of a sensitivity to that. And we were talking a little bit on Patreon earlier, how you can have something and you almost start catching it a little bit sooner. Like, you can see a feeling coming up, and you can almost look at it and see a potential in getting concerned about that, or a past assumption that you've made about that feeling. And then, but you see it and you're like, yeah, but that's just an assumption. That's not actually what's happening. I don't actually know what's happening. And so for me, it's just been coming back to, well, I don't know what this means. I don't actually know that thing that I'm assuming. And it's always just like pulling the rug out from whatever you're standing on. It almost becomes a constant process. And then it starts to build up even more here and there. And you're all of a sudden you're standing on like 3 or 4 fucking rugs or whatever. And then there's the potential to judge yourself for being on those rugs or on all of those rugs, as opposed to just one and not catching it as soon. But adding that concern only adds another rug. And so it's this almost like a game of back and forth that isn't really a one or the other. It's just, how much bullshit are you standing upon? Like, how much assumption are you allowing to have impact over your experience here and now, as opposed to looking at it, dancing on it, and even understanding that you don't have to pull the rug out from under you. You can be experiencing a bunch of rugs on top of each other and dance on those, and just not have concern for how many rugs. So fuck, that's even something that standing on a bunch of rugs and thinking that they have to be pulled back before you can feel better is just another fucking assumption. Fuck. I just realized that one too. Fuck, even that.
Yeah, we create our own journey.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's funny too because it just reminds me of like essentially getting caught up in an ego trip, and then you immediately, why am I here? I shouldn't like I this shouldn't happen to me anymore. And this is why I think something that very much differentiates the conversation that you guys have, or say like Eckhart Tolle, or like anybody in the non-duality space, whatever the case would be, like in the sense that they're very much like protecting peace, right? And not the recognition that you're the entire spectrum. Like you're the only experientially, like I've only um, you know, got tied up again. Like I've never not continued to get tied up, not built layers, not, added rugs, right? So it's almost ignorant in a sense, like it's almost like believing in a higher power or something like that, in a sense, to assume that you somehow one day get there where you do not do not build any rugs, you do not go through any side quests, as we like to call them. But um yeah, it and that has been hitting me pretty considerably recently, especially before the retreat. True, too, just in the sense that like, why am I stuck in this? And it's interesting because, and I've said this before, but it's always just that subtle opportunity between self-judgment and self-honesty, right? Like you can, choose to judge yourself, and it's an absolutely fucking useless emotion. Or you can, look at it and be willing to look at it. And, it's easier said than done, as like, of course it is, but it's a lot easier when you know that you're not what you think, right? And you know that it doesn't mean anything about your value. Then almost looking at it, it's like, why wouldn't you look at it? Right. But that's, again, easier to say said than done, to assume it doesn't mean anything about your value.
Yeah, it's a practice, right? And you start to recognize that the practice is actually just letting go of focusing on that thought at all. We keep assuming, like, I got to stop assuming that it has anything to do with my value. It's like, actually, you just need to stop entertaining the thought whatsoever. Just continue on, as it were. And this was the big insight that I walked away from the 2 Colorado retreats with, was that you're already what you are when you go into any situation. Like, this is something that you and I have talked about in our group Zooms on Patreon. You will show up and you will say something, and you'll go through whatever it is you're processing, and then you'll get to the end of it, and then the conversation will continue. And then normally after that, as with everybody, we'll start to go, did I add anything of value? Did anybody get anything out of that? What was I even talking about? And what's funny is we've already played our part. We were already embodying everything that we had become up until that point. It's just that all of a sudden now we're trying to think about it like, well, how is that supposed to play out? And how am I supposed to act? And how are people going to look at me? And that is all part of the process that's happening for the next time you're going to talk. And it's so interesting because we're like, I'm doing something wrong. And then we get to the point and we start dwelling on what we could be doing wrong instead of just doing what we're doing, which is what the whole point was the entire time. So that said, I know that you've gone through quite the evolution since you've joined us on Patreon, so much so to the point that now I believe that you are working on your own podcast with another member of our community. And so I wanted to discuss that process with you a little bit. How's that going in terms of being able to sit down and just let yourself vent? Let yourself just express what you are without second guessing what it is you're expressing.
It's funny you say that. Whereas I think you're probably pretty well aware the biggest hindrance of progress in it thus far is very much what we're talking about, right? In the sense that it's, what does this mean about me? Am I clear enough at this point? Speaking clear enough, I should say, more specifically, and all that. And it's funny that it's just a bullshit hurdle we create around ourselves, like in the sense that, like, if I were to go listen to season 1, episode 1, great episode, by the way, I will say it's still a fucking sick episode. But like, if you think about just both of your like voices and how free you sound and how you guys interact together and stuff like that, like it's much more seamless now. And I think the recognition and Andrew's voice just being like literally like a different person to some extent. And I think it just very much goes to show how like the only way is just to do the shit. Like it's not even trying to do it either. It's just doing it. Right. And so anyway, I think that was something that was also very helpful that came from the retreat in the sense that Susan and I met each other. And like as you guys are probably, it's funny I say that even though you guys went like what, a year without meeting each other or something like that, with yours. But yeah, I think we're definitely very much ready to get into it now. We've had a number of like probably in the 20s or so of conversations, and in the sense that about what really just shooting the shit, if I'm being honest, going back and forth, because we don't intend for it to be anything that's pre-contrived or whatever. Like the idea around the podcast in its entirety is to just to speak on that topic of identity. And because it's few and far between in terms of who's willing to talk about it and who's willing to really get into it, because you can imagine it can be a very sensitive topic for many. And I do like how you guys consistently mention that this is not for the faint of heart. This is not an easy path, implying that there's some sort of path, but in the sense that yeah, it's turbulent as fuck. So but at the same time, I think that anybody who's at least began to start questioning and letting go of some bigger hindrances to their life, so to speak, will certainly see that benefit immediately and understand the direction almost immediately. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to recording some episodes, and yeah, hopefully get you both on it as well.
Oh, I'm very excited for the release of your podcast for sure, because I love chatting with both you and Susan. One thing I wanted to mention quickly to our listener and to you as well. Andrew and I, one of the reasons that the podcast has evolved so much over 5 seasons is because, frankly, we talk way more often than just recording podcast episodes. There is approximately 500 or so hours of group discussions that started about a month after we started recording the podcast on Patreon. For anybody who's interested, those videos are all still there. You can actually go all the way back to when we first did our first Patreon groups and the 2 or 3 people who joined us, and you can listen to the conversations that eventually ended up forming what is now the podcast, because it was all that extra grinding at the insights, grinding at the conflict in our conversation, where we were using different concepts when we were trying to identify the same reality. It's all just grinding it out, right? Just do it, keep doing it, and eventually you will get better and better and better and better at it. It's just a matter of putting the time and the attention.
Yeah, for sure. What I've realized, even just more recently, is how much self-doubt is irrelevant. Like it's just fucking irrelevant. Like the thing is going to happen. How it happens, how it goes, what the outcome is, isn't going to be dictated based on how well prepared you feel going into it. That just allows you to feel a little bit more comfortable. But oftentimes, the depth of the insights are found the less prepared you are, the less honed in to a specific track you are, allows for free and freer, deeper and deeper insights to arise. So if you think about, like, from each moment, there's an infinite number of potentials. Your preparation is compressing that to one potential. Like, you're preparing for one thing, assuming that that's the case. And then as soon as you take one step, if it doesn't land on that, all of that preparation that you put in was irrelevant. But then we'll think that that's the best thing. So then we try and like steer it back onto that, even if it's not going that way, because it's not, it's already off that made up fucking path. And now after you take that step, there's a new number of infinite paths to take. That first one that you prepared so long for is now more or less irrelevant. And so I find that interesting, just with self-doubt, because I've dealt with plenty of that in my life, still deal with it all the time. Not to say that it's been overcome by any means. It still comes up. I've just gotten better at recognizing that it's bullshit, and just how much each and every day going through things like, I don't know where it's going. I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know if what I'm saying will resonate more or less with someone else. And the thing that I think I said very poorly could resonate with someone else way more than saying it super clearly in a different way, because those are still just subjective judgments of something that we're going through. And so when it comes to the podcast, I think understanding, at least for me, for Dualistic Unity, we were talking earlier about, how the fuck you even describe it. It can't be described because it's just an expression of you. Like, there's not even a specific topic or a track that we go through. We just get on and have a conversation. It revolves to a degree around certain things people could say, but it's just us expressing ourselves in whatever way that is throughout the day. So whether we're feeling really good going into an episode, feeling really uncomfortable going into an episode, feeling, whatever it is, it's kind of irrelevant because it's just an expression of you. So there can't be a correct way to go in. There can't be a correct way. It like cuts off the potential for a correct way to have a conversation. When it's just the expression of you, you find out the correct way as you say things. Like me literally right now is finding out the correct way to have this podcast episode, but it can't be a preconceived notion. And the more preconceived notions we have about what we think it should be, each and every time we buy into that, it cuts down on the potential to be whatever it is. It cuts down on the potential to dig in to certain insights, to be oftentimes surprised by what the fuck comes out of your mouth, because you're not maintaining an idea of what should be said that's all based on what you've already done. It has to be based on what you know. You can't know something that you haven't done or experienced or said or had a certain perspective of in the past. But again, in regards to anyone listening to this, anyone willing to continue on in this sort of process of just being free, there's not something to stand on. You just have to keep finding out. You don't know what it's going to be. You don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. You don't know where you're going to be at tomorrow. And there's both a beauty in that, but also it's just uncertainty, which, if you're afraid of that, if you think that it's a bad thing to not know where something is going, there's going to be a resistance to that. But all you're resisting is yourself. All you're resisting is your potential unfolding and being willing to find out how deep that goes.
And expectations, man, like they just absolutely fuck everything. And it's funny, what you were just saying was making me think of how, like, I would say probably the best presentations I've given in my life have been entirely unprepared for, like completely not a bit. And I literally just think of it as not creating essentially all the boxes for all the words that you need to say, and instead you just say what what you're presenting, right? And it's funny, it really makes me, and this is something I've bounced off the group on Patreon before, but if you look back in your life and just see all of the indications in from the past of like things that seem to have worked, and you're like, oh, why did that work? And now you're like, obviously I know why that fucking worked, but like my head was up my ass when I was doing it, right? And like one of those is presenting. And it's funny, probably in my last year of college or something like that, I realized that, oh yeah, the less I define all the points that I need to hit on a presentation, the better I do, right? And and that's really served me for quite some time. I mean, there's both ends of the spectrum on that too. But I mean, if you're going in talking about something that you've literally completely unfamiliar with to some extent, then I mean, prepare to have a shaky fucking presentation. And that's why it's interesting that like we can cling to those things, like this is it, never prepare for anything, never plan anything. And it's like, and that's again very similar to what I was saying before about like letting shit own you, as opposed to just not letting shit own you. You can't be owned, right? But yeah, the expectations associated with presentations have really been something that has hit me, and similarly even with the expectations we build around like doing a new thing. So say if we're talking about this podcast, should I expect, I mean, like imagine that I come into a podcast and I expect to just have no anxiety and I can just, be a great podcaster immediately or whatever that, conceptual box is. But like, of course it's going to be uncomfortable your first time. And I think we assume that we can get rid of the discomfort without going through the thing. And that's the silliest fucking assumption that we make. And I hear it so often in the sense that I'll tell somebody, really what they don't want to hear, and I'll get back like, that doesn't make me feel good. I'm like, shocker.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's interesting with the preparing and the assumptions that we make and the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. Like that, letting go of that has helped me a ton. Like even in regards to presentation, like the idea that I should or shouldn't go into it with a certain mentality or certain feelings. Like for a while, and going back to the shit I went through in high school with just being overly concerned about everything and every potential perception of myself. I had this idea that I shouldn't be nervous. I shouldn't be worried. And I thought for years that I just have to get rid of that in order to live the life I want to live. And that's not the case at all. There's nothing wrong with being concerned. There's nothing wrong with being nervous. And if it's something that you haven't done many times, it's going to be something that arises. If stepping into uncertainty is something that you haven't done very much, you're going to have certain feelings come up. And so it's always that's staying on the ball, is recognizing that there is no should or shouldn't ever. Whatever you're feeling is what you're feeling. Whatever you're going through is what you're going through. Your idea of what you should be going through relative to what you're going through is going to take away from your ability to just be that, to just step into it. Even if you're super nervous or your heart's racing, like who's to say there's something wrong with going through that? And so bringing it over to what you were talking about with just, I guess, just other people in general, and going through things with other people, especially people that are close to you in your life. I'm curious how that process has unfolded for you, because I know that it's kind of gone hand in hand for me with the desire to convince people of this, the desire to convince people of, I say this as if it's a fucking thing, but it's just a conversation unfolding. And so for me, the more I want to say clearly, but it's not even that, the more I've recognized just how uncertain everything is, the less desire I've had to convince other people, because that was a stressor for me early on. Like even 6 months ago, I was still thinking that not only should other people be involved in this conversation or having it in themselves or letting go of their assumptions, but I should be able to convince them. Like if I'm clear, I should be able to convince them. And the quote unquote clearer I've gotten with this, the less desire there's been to convince anyone, because the whole time the only thing I was doing was trying to convince myself. The more clearly I've recognized that there aren't other people, that it's all my projections, that it's all my perceptions of other people, the more ease I've had in my life. And it's been funny to see just how things play out. Like people do end up being more curious. So Rainer, for you, I'm curious how that has played out, because I do see them very much going hand in hand. Like I think a lot of people go through early on, they see some benefits in their life, they want to tell everyone. And initially I think it comes from a helpful spot, but at the same time, it's coming from a clinging to certainty spot, if that's the thing. And we try and convince other people, and I really do think it's just us trying to convince ourselves that what I'm going through, what I'm doing is valid. Like we're still holding on to the perception of other people and kind of needing that to validate our own perceptions.
It's funny how just hearing you say that, I was thinking of just how, like, even with you, as the desire to convince other people has, melted away, your influence has just increased, exponentially. And how good of an example is that in just the sense of like the power of not trying to get anywhere with anybody and just, being there for them. And just essentially treating people how they've coached you to treat them, right? Like you can't paint everybody with the same brush. And I think I used to very much cling to this. Like I would say like initially after like some of the larger releases, so to speak, I think I really was like out like trying to convince everybody, telling my friends, telling my family, like, you know what I mean, just like, oh, it's this, and that's essentially always just putting myself on a fucking soapbox, like putting myself on a pedestal, and I'm really just trying to convince myself, right? So it's that part in particular has definitely been very interesting. And it's funny how you kind of swing both ways, though, to the extent, like, as in you swing to in one direction where you're like, oh, I don't want to convince, or don't even want to talk about this to anybody or anything. And then, but where's the responsibility in that too, right? So I've definitely gone back and forth on it. But it's funny that like just the more you try, or the less you desire to convince other people, the less you desire to be seen as a person that gets it, the less that you build up the fucking idea of yourself. It's almost like we assume that talking about it is like excluded from the actual thing, right? And that's why spiritual gurus really are, in a sense, like stealing, like stealing your watch and selling it back to you. It's like it's I think that like analogy has become a lot more clear over recent times. And one thing in particular that I thought that was most um not shocking at all, if I'm being honest, but from the retreat, that was one of the biggest takeaways about the two of you, is just essentially at the retreat there is no authority. Like, you guys are both just at the retreat, you just happen to have organized it, right? Like, in the sense that you guys are both going through shit yourselves, you guys are both like, yeah, like working through shit, and you always will be, right? Like, it's just but I can definitely see people's desires to put you guys on a pedestal and essentially be like, oh, like, you guys have been through so much shit, so you don't go through anything anymore. And that's just like not the case at all.
Frankly, I'd be worried. If I wasn't going through the shit, I would know immediately that I'm losing my ability to empathize. That's the thing. Like, that's the only way that you can empathize with somebody going through the shit, is to know what it's like. And that doesn't mean as a memory, because your memory of the shit isn't the shit, right? The shit is the experience of it. And so unless you're going through it, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And so it definitely helps to keep that in mind. It's interesting because we were talking about how early in the journey, it's like you want to get out there and tell everyone else. You want to tell others, but you're really just talking to yourself. And I really like the double entendre here, because you're still talking to yourself. Like, they're still you. And so, as much as there's the individual journey of recognizing, like, right, I'm just talking to myself, that's all there ever is, because everything is you. And so, there's two different things happening there, right? And at some point, they have to meet. That's the fun part about this, is that you're like, right, I'm just talking to myself, so I'm going to stop talking for the sake of convincing others. And that's when those others are able to better hear you, because now you're not separating yourself from them. And so now you're acting more as yourself, but that's in the collective sense. And so it's all kind of happening. Like, it's like the two different scales are coming together to recognize that there's no difference. It's like the difference between the perception of internal and external. When you look at them deep enough, they don't make any sense anymore. And so we really are just trying to come to terms with the fact that it's all just us. But that means both individually and collectively, both things are happening at the same time. And so relationships are very tricky and can be. But when we start changing early on in the path, it's interesting because we start to change, and then we get a response from the people around us. And it's like they seem uncomfortable with the changes that we're going through. And we immediately think, well, they resent me for the change that I'm going through. And it doesn't dawn on us that it's not the changes we're going through that's bothering them. It's the fact that they have to change accordingly. So now they have to rely on their ability to adapt. They were relying on you being a fixture, something that wasn't going to turn into uncertainty. And so now all of a sudden they have to rely on themselves. They have to faith in themselves. It has nothing to do with the change you're going through. It has to do with the fact that their environment just shifted and they're afraid that they can't change with you.
Of course it's like uncomfortable for them because they've built this idea of you and they're really relying on you to stay within it, right? And it's funny, I remember hearing this, maybe it was like shortly after some of those larger releases, somebody told me, they said it's really hard to get a read on what you're thinking. And I noticed how you, Andrew, you were talking about this. Maybe it was at the last episode, or it might have been the last DU episode. But anyway, yeah, it's well, you were more specifically talking in that case about people, not necessarily about like what you're thinking, but more people getting a read on you or having an idea of you and saying, oh, it's like difficult to build this idea of you or whatever. And it's funny that like the thinking comment recently, when I got that, I was thinking like, or I, said right back, I was like, I'm not listening to it. So like, I don't suggest you listen to it either. Right. Like in the sense that like, of course it's difficult to tell because it's meaningless and it's impossible. And there's is infinite things that I could be floating around through a linear process that just is a shitty mechanism and is just totally not useful for experiencing reality and the uncertain like nature of reality, right? So no, I think that was a really funny one in particular. But aside from that, with regards to relationships and just the concepts we build around them, that was a pretty considerable hurdle for myself as well. And I say that as if I'm past it, but not. But it just building essentially the idea around relationships. If you even refer to a relationship with to anybody now, like they would certainly assume you're like referring to the concept of their relationship in its entirety and not referring to what relationship points to, right? Which is just being with another person, right? And I think those conceptual walls are extremely difficult for people to like to knock down and to essentially go through all the different layers associated with them and to think that you've got there and then oh no I certainly haven't, right? Because we naturally do get attached to things and we continue to go through that process. But it's interesting because it's always associated with the conceptual label that we build around it, whereas the reality of relationships, like I have a relationship with the person at the front door that I walk by. I have a relationship with the store clerk. You have all these subtle relationships with the entirety of the rest of you all around you, but you don't classify those as relationships, and you only think of your romantic relationship as your relationship. You conceptually refer to yourself as single or in a relationship, which is kind of comical to some extent. And it's funny that all the suffering that's associated with relationships is associated with the label. It has, I would say 90% is associated with the label, as opposed to, there's certainly the physical aspects of relationships and the struggles surrounding them. But I guess I'm just saying that like it really always is the label that's holding us back in its entirety. And it's funny that once those like labels are essentially drift away to some extent, then it's almost like you're released in the sense that you're like, oh, I can do anything I want. And there's like opportunity for some momentum in that. But it's not really about just doing as much shit as you possibly can. It's so it really comes down to the foot in both worlds in a sense, that you can continue to go back to this is a label, this is a concept, it's meaningless. Am I letting this label own me? And often the case it is.
That's really interesting. I like what you were saying there regarding relationship, because we're always in relationship with reality. And so just like with fear, we tend to categorize it. I'm afraid of this, and I'm afraid of this, and I'm afraid if that happened, and I'm afraid if this happened. I'm afraid if this person thinks this. It's like, no, you're just afraid. Like you're experiencing fear in total, which is a part of what you are. And as you work on that fear and your relationship with it, the fear will dissipate in all of these individual aspects. Well, the same is true with relationship. It's like, I got to work on my relationship with my girlfriend and my friend and buddy at the front door and all that. It's like, no, you just need to work on relationship, which means your relationship with yourself. Why are you so easily threatened? Why are you in conflict? Why are you making assumptions? These are all of the things that your relationships are built upon, and they all come down to your relationship with yourself. So you can deal with that as one whole thing in the same way as you can deal with the experience of fear as one whole thing.
Yeah, and it's always assumption with how it should be happening too, like relative to yourself. Like any relationship that you're in, the conflict comes from you maintaining a conceptual idea of what that relationship looks like and whether it matches with that. And even it goes to say with, as we experience changes and people in our lives have to, you know, get with it, or hop off, basically. As you experience conflict with that, like just in my own experience, I can make the assumption that people should accept the changes that I'm going through. And that is me boxing them and creating an expectation for them. It's not to say that there aren't actions that are taken. If someone's just so fucking resistant to your changes, you make changes yourself and you can respond to that. But oftentimes we can get caught up in thinking this person should accept me for how I am because you see them in a certain way. Say, just take parents or siblings or anyone, say parents for this example, that they should accept me for who I am because they're my parent. And it's only because you're maintaining an idea of what a parent should do. They should have unconditional acceptance for anything that their kid goes through. And that's on you. That's on your own experience and your own expectations. And that is another thing to be let go of, is that assumption. And it's not to say that you can't recognize certain behaviors. You can't go through the practice of discernment when people are acting in certain ways and the conflict that arises from not accepting reality for what it is. But there is a component in your own life of not accepting reality for what it is as you maintain those expectations for other people. And it can be kind of a bitch because a lot of times they just won't. But it's been interesting, at least for me, as I have dropped some of my expectations of people fitting a certain role or acting in a certain way or responding to me in a certain way because I've maintained an idea. Their own process has kind of lightened a little bit. They do tend to see things a little bit differently. And I think, and again, that's just my experience. It's not to say that every time someone lets go of their own expectations of someone else, that person is, it's like a magic trick where they all of a sudden start accepting you more. But I do think there's at least a twang of a component there of dropping your own expectations of someone seeing someone else in a certain way. So no matter what situation you're going through, no matter how much you're changing or how many things that you're processing, it does come back to you. Like your experience does always come back to you and what you're going through and the assumptions that you're making about, even if it's a response to how you're changing, it's still assumption. And it's not to say that there's a right or a wrong with that, but there is a baseline experience that you're going through that has a certain degree of potential suffering that comes with it. And your resistance to how, quote unquote, other people are responding to that can exacerbate that experience. And we're always, based on our responses, kind of shifting the potential in how much suffering we experience through that. And it's not to say that the suffering goes away, but there is a certain degree that's going to be there based on the experience, based on the person's response, and just a certain type of experience that you go through with certain situations. But you always have the potential to mitigate how much more you're adding on top of that based on your perspective and your willingness to let go of your expectations of other people.
I mean, you're really there. You're just I mean, another perfect example of just essentially focusing on your experience and how that's where you have influence, right? Like, and that's where you're having influence on all those other people, as opposed to trying to convince them of something by taking shit lightly. You know, they're seeing, oh, you can do that. You can survive while taking shit lightly. This actually looks, this example that I'm seeing looks like, like a great way to exist, as opposed to like taking everything extremely seriously and, thinking everything means shit about your value, right? So, no, I think that makes perfect sense as to why that, works.
It's funny. We were talking about this in Patreon the other day. It's an old lesson I learned being a salesman, that you always focus on the benefit, not the product. Right. And so a lot of us, we get out there and we're like, oh my God, this conversation, these insights, the concepts, oh my God. And meanwhile, we're freaking out. Like, we're in no way calm or at peace or anything. We're trying to get something across. There's some intensity and some desperation behind it almost. And so we're not in any way showing the benefit. We're too busy focusing on the product instead of actually using it and then just experiencing life as such. And that in itself is enough. I've had numerous people tell me over the years, I don't always understand what you're saying. I don't always agree with what you're saying, but I love watching you say it. And it's just because I'm quite obviously enjoying myself and I have no ill intent, right? I'm doing this because it's fun. If you don't want to participate, I'm happy changing the subject. No problem at all. But I'm going to find a way in whatever conversation we have to find something interesting about it, right? To enjoy it, to get the most out of it. Because to me, it's not just about killing fucking time with small talk. If it's small talk, that's on me. Why is it small talk outside of my fear of big talk, right? And why am I afraid of big talk? Because I might say something wrong, right? It's all just this fucking narrative. And at the end of the day, it's really just about enjoying yourself, which means not having so many goddamn preferences. We had somebody earlier on Andrew's Instagram say, well, if you're not holding on to a firm opinion, how are we supposed to know who you are? And it's like, if you're holding on to a firm opinion, you're resisting change. And of course you're uptight. Of course you're not having fun. Of course you're responding the way that you're responding because you have something to defend. But if you're willing to question your opinions and your preferences, if you're willing to go through discomfort, if you're willing to go on a road trip where you might not have the ability to take a second shower that day, and you realize, like, right, I didn't really need to the whole fucking time. This is okay. And nobody seems to be commenting on my smell. Like that's all the point is to get out there and see what you're capable of. It's not to sit in your apartment wondering what you're capable of, right? Go find out, because anything your brain produces, it's just based on what it already has done. You're not giving it anything new. You can imagine stuff, but the best way to really find out is just to go and find out.
Yeah, I think it's funny with the benefit over product conversation, because I know that was one we got into, and that really hit me hard in regards to, even just in the past, I've said I'm a shitty salesman, and not that I'm settling upon that by any means. It's just a fun little thing to say, but I haven't really had any practice. Like, I've never had a sales job. I've never had to necessarily, outside of like interviews for jobs, sell myself, but I didn't really ever, even before having this conversation, maintain the idea that I needed to sell myself necessarily. It was just kind of going into it, and it's like, this is what I am. I'm just gonna be here. And I did, I think, a while ago, even understand that if I'm going in selling myself in a certain way, I'm not being myself, and then I'm maybe going to get a job that I'm not going to necessarily align with. And it's super important to understand that. But with the benefit over product, when it comes to this conversation, I think it's very indicative of where you're at, like how much you're investing in yourself. Because if you're prioritizing the product over the benefit in regards to this conversation, like being really good at having the conversation, how many people am I convincing? It's like on that spectrum of towards yourself or away from yourself, towards the letting go of what you think you are or reinforcing your idea of yourself. And so as you prioritize the quote unquote product of this conversation, it's prioritizing your ego. It's prioritizing your conceptual idea of yourself. As you prioritize the benefit over the product, it's letting go more and more of how it looks to everyone else, how you're acting, how much value you're building for yourself based on how well you can say things, how well you can convince someone else, how many people you can get involved in the conversation. That's all egotistical bullshit. That's all taking you further from that state of freedom. But as you prioritize the benefit, you see that the priority is not how well you say something. It's not how well you perform. It's not how many people you convince. It's your state as you go into it. And if you're prioritizing how well you do, there's going to be more nerves that bubble up. There's going to be more expectations that bubble up. There's going to be more things that you think you have to live up to. And that's hindering the benefits of this conversation, which is the state of freedom, which is the lack of expectations. How it comes out, the outcome is fucking irrelevant relative to how you're feeling moment to moment. And it almost always plays out like that. Like as we prioritize how we're seen, how it comes across, how it's looked at, how other people are perceiving us, we're prioritizing how well we're expressing things as opposed to digging into ourselves and prioritizing the benefit. And so I think for me, even just in the last few weeks, I needed that reminder of the reason for this conversation, like the benefit of it, and even seeing myself more like I was probably seeing myself more on the side of being good at the product over the benefit. Like I could say the words well, and it's almost taking away from the benefit of your experience. And as you maintain that idea of yourself as someone who can say the words well, if there's a instance where it doesn't match that, there's the potential for this flood of concern, fear, worry, anxiety, nerves, all that shit to come in only because you're prioritizing the product, only because you're prioritizing how it looks to everyone else as opposed to your own experience. So as the further, quote unquote, further you go with all of this, I think the more that shifts from the product to the benefit. And it's funny because as the benefit is prioritized, the product gets way better in the sense of how it actually plays out as opposed to playing out based on your preferences or how you think other people should be seeing things or your measurement of how many people you can fucking convince of any of this stuff.
It's interesting to think of it in the sense that, like, if you're, as soon as you're trying to be something else, so say you're in a job interview like you referenced, or say a first date or something like that, there's just the societal narrative that's like, bring your best, like have rehearse every fucking question, do all these, like, and that's creating your suffering for when you eventually have to violate that idea because that's not what you are, right? And it makes perfect sense as to why, like, any prioritization of product, any like noun, so to speak, right, like is really essentially like, unless you're just doing something for the purpose of doing it, then you're in conflict with reality entirely, right? But yeah, I always saw that. I think I had this for quite some time. I had this like narrative associated with like prioritization of, say, me right now, me in a year, me in 2 weeks, and then it's always like a gamble as to, or am I going to be around 2 weeks? Am I going to be around in 2 years, like 20, right? And that's ultimately like what kind of led me to essentially aligning back with myself, or recognizing that those were all fucking ideas, right? And that's why I have heard a lot of like beautiful stories about Zen koans and stuff like that, essentially with like a quote unquote teacher essentially just like leading a person back to themselves, right? To recognize that all the ideas that they currently are accepting as truth and still thinking are real, and potentially, and in most aspects, living for, right, as opposed to the reality of themselves. So like, even in the, in the statement, not to get too dark here, but in the statement of like for suicide, like, I want to kill myself, like those are two different I and myself, right? So it's like, who's really upset at who here, right? Like, and it's just always comes down to living for ideas in their entirety.
Yeah, I know that one from firsthand experience, that you spend so long trying to escape the misery, you don't realize you're bringing it with you. Like you just don't know that you're holding on to this idea of yourself simply because the idea of not having an idea seems terrifying, because there's so much uncertainty there, and you think that you need certainty because everybody else seems to be very certain. So if I'm not certain, then that's got to be indicating that I'm not doing very well either. And so it's just this big runaround until finally you go, right, I don't know what I'm capable of, what I am, what my value is, and then you're able to find out. Right, but it's just in doing it, it's in getting in there, it's in being and allowing the process to play out without running from it, without trying to escape it, without focusing on a product that's going to offer you that instant solution. And ultimately that's what we're talking about whenever you see a Christian come to your door with a goddamn fucking Bible. Product, here's the product, it's going to fix everything for you. It's like, well, it's been around for 2,000 years, hasn't done fuck all. No, it's going to work eventually, like, you know, that kind of thing. Or the law of attraction, you know, product, just focus on what you want, it'll attract it to you. It's like, what if I want things that are toxic for me? What if I want things that are reinforcing my prison? Shh, product. Right. And it's just because you have all of these people practicing this optimism for this end result. And that is the problem with the concept. Even the concept of peace or enlightenment or happiness, immediately our brain goes, oh, concept, end result, I just got to get there. And it's like, that's unfortunately not how this works, because there is no end result. There is no end to this journey, which means that you have to change your perspective of what it is you're doing here. You're not trying to get somewhere. You're trying to master being here, which means just allowing yourself to be what you are, because you are the here and now. It can't happen without you. And we get in the way. We're like, but journey, the promise of something else. It's like, you're not even looking at what you've got right now. So why are you trying to get somewhere else? Well, because I don't understand what I'm going through right now. It's going to follow you regardless of where you go.
Yeah, that product benefit balance is so interesting, whether it's the Bible, whether it's religion, whether it's law of attraction. It's always a sacrifice of the benefits as you prioritize the product. You know, take something like law of attraction and you're like fucking manifesting and all that shit. Every single moment that you're trying to get to the fucking thing, even if you're bullshitting yourself into believing I've already got it. I'm not trying to get a thing. I'm trying to get a feeling. You're sacrificing the benefits every moment along the way for that thing that you think is going to solve everything. And it never does, because Ray just said there's no end. There are only means. That's all you ever got. So if you're not prioritizing the benefits of just being here now without so many goddamn fucking expectations all the time, or assumptions about where your value lies, or always trying to judge yourself. You know, you take one step and you're like, oh, did I take that step correctly? Was it too far? Was it too soft? Did I step? Is my next step going to be okay? And we get caught in this judgment all the time because we think that, you know, the end of the road is going to be where all of it's solved, where it's figured out. Oh, once I get to the end of the road, then I'm not going to be concerned about which step and how far my step is going, or how far. I don't know. I'm getting caught on the step thing here, but you know, we get concerned over the immediate, thinking that we get to a certain spot where it all goes away. It's you in process, you taking those steps. If you can't let go of the judgment of the step that you're on, you're never going to let go of it until you do, until there's a step that you take where you don't get concerned. You recognize, oh, there is no right distance to take this step. Until you recognize that, you're not going to let it go. So it's just whether, and oftentimes we just use the product, we use the end of the road as an excuse to let go of our concern, because we feel like our value is high enough that we don't have to judge ourselves. We've overlaid the judgment. We've kind of suppressed the judgment of how far that step goes, or how short or long our step is, and our judgment of that distance. And we've overlaid something to suppress that concern, because now we're looking at some other shiny object. We're like, oh, I don't have to worry about that, even though it's still there, even though that concern is still there. We've distracted ourselves, but now I got this nice car. So now whether or not I take a step isn't relevant. I can take this shitty step but I still have the car, and now everyone's seeing the car, but our experience is always the step. We're always just taking those steps. And so if you can't let go of your concern about your judgment of the step that you're on, you're never going to until you do. So it's irrelevant where you're going, or what thing you get to, what product you achieve, or what product you're following. It's just about the step. And if you're not prioritizing the benefits of being able to let go of that concern for it, you're not going to be able to until you do. And then you'll realize, oh, it took me 100 steps to recognize that I don't have to judge this step. I could have just done it after the first step, and the benefit was right there the whole time.
You're making me think a lot about just essentially the suffering that we create with procrastination, and essentially just that putting things off and creating that internal suffering like throughout the entire time, when the reality is you'll be there when you're doing it too, so you may as well fucking do it now. As opposed to putting it off and suffering through things. Like, I mean, personally, I know I've suffered over things in the realm of years, like putting stuff off and essentially telling myself that I wasn't ready, or that there was going to be a certain time. Like, surprise, you're never fucking ready for anything that's uncertain, right? Like, and everything's uncertain, right? So it's it's bizarre that we create essentially this. It always comes back to just like the value by comparison, because like we're always just comparing our experiences. Oh, this person doesn't have to work and I do, so I'm less than that person, and I have a shitty experience because of that, which is ultimately always rooted in just like jealousy, right? And always in separation and division, right? um but no, that one for me is something I've still been working on a lot for sure. And with regards to procrastination and stuff like that, just in the sense that like, oh, I think I should be doing something else other than exactly where the fuck I am, right? And that's always where all your suffering comes from. Yeah.
And that right there, I'd say, is the reason that the podcast isn't just a podcast, that there is a community behind it, and that we put so much work into maintaining a connection to that community. Because the concepts are one thing, the discussion is one thing, the subject matter, the stuff we go through in episode after episode after episode, that's just part of the journey, because it really is just having a chance to kind of reassess everything that you think you know. The rest of it is actually just being in the shit. And that's why the groups are so important, because you come to the groups, you have all of this concern about what you're going to say, whether you're going to be interesting enough, whether you know enough, whether anybody's going to care what you're talking about. And maybe you sit on the sidelines for a bit, and then all of a sudden a group ends and you haven't said a thing. And you thought to yourself, well, everybody else is kind of saying shit that's not really that mind blowing. I mean, I could have just thrown something in, it would have been fine. And so then all of a sudden the next group, you do even a little bit. And then you walk away doubting yourself. Right. And then somebody's like, that was fucking awesome. Thank you so much. I was just thinking about that earlier. And you're like, oh, well, shit, maybe there's some value there. Right. But that's the point. It's the being in it. It's the being in it in an environment that allows you to just keep pushing the envelope, to keep pushing your limitations, and to recognize that the only thing that's been stopping you is your fucking fear. Yeah, there's other people out there that are judgmental, but the only reason you give a fuck about them is because you're afraid. So in an environment where nobody's judging you because they don't want to be judged, you can recognize how much of that fear is yours. And then when you go back out into the world and meet those people, you'll recognize that those judgmental people are afraid. You don't have to worry about their judgment. So part of it is the discussion. Part of it is the application. The rest of it is just shutting the fuck up. Right. And so that all said, you've been with us in the groups for a long time. If you had to summarize what it is you've taken from those groups over the last several months to a year, what would you say it is more than anything else?
Oof. I mean, honestly, my experience with the groups has been interesting. I want to look this up because I'm curious, but I think I signed up for Patreon right when you guys started it, and then just never used it. Just paid, for quite some time, to the extent that at one point I was like, why am I paying for this thing? I only listen to this podcast. And I actually I think there might have been like a month or two where I like got rid of it and then got it back again. And I essentially had planned then when I got back to it, I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna fucking use this thing if I'm gonna pay for it, right? And then ultimately I put that off, some more time for sure, to the extent that I would have this narrative like, oh, it's during, an hour where I'm, I have something else scheduled, or I'd create all these excuses until finally I realized that I was creating all the fucking excuses to not just getting engaged in the conversation. And essentially, so much of that is rooted in wanting to be seen as a person that gets it, right? And I think that you often see that quite frequently when somebody's new to the group and stuff like that. And you just give them some time, and then they certainly realize that they're doing that, and they go on from there. But essentially, one of the biggest things I think that I get from the groups is honestly just that brutal self-honesty from other people as well, or quote unquote other people, as you know what I mean. But in the sense that, like, how often do you have a group of friends that will just say, you're just thinking about yourself a lot right now. and like and often that's taken so poorly, right, when it's truly the reality of what's going on and what you're tied up in. So honestly, it's like a community that I've never experienced before, in the sense that everybody is truly honest with each other. And it's funny that I've definitely, like, reconceptualize the term love to kind of include that, if I'm being honest, and how I look at it. Like, loving somebody is telling them to shut the fuck up when they're thinking about themselves a shit ton and just talking about themselves, right? Like, that is love. And yeah, it's bizarre that we've created this idea of unconditional love that's like love without condition, when, like, that it's almost like they're thinking about it backwards, right? Like, in the sense that loving someone is doing what you see right for them, seeing yourself in them, and doing what you see right for yourself, right? Always, no matter what, right? And that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it's very much opposite to the societal construct of unconditional love.
Yeah, it's nice to be told from somebody who's not judging you that you've just gotten a little lost in hurting yourself, and that it's okay, because we all do it. And then you can come back from it.
Yeah, exactly. And with the groups, it's interesting to see that play out for people, because if you're super involved in thinking about yourself, it can be on either end. You can not say anything, or you can constantly be saying things just for the sake of saying things and because you're thinking about yourself. And it's important to recognize that on either end, there's no right way to say anything. And I think that maybe plays into the side of the person who comes on and isn't willing to say anything. And then it's also important to recognize that you have nothing to prove. You don't have to convince anyone of anything, that you're anything whatsoever. And I think that plays into the person who maybe just talks for the sake of talking and brings up like 100 different points in one segment of speaking. It's like, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. It's okay. It's all right. You can just share what you felt like sharing. And either way, there's no right or wrong way, but it really just comes down to sensitivity, and how it plays out in the groups is going to be reflective of how it's playing out in your own life. And so how much sensitivity you have to the groups is going to be how much sensitivity you have to yourself relative to everyone else, because you can start to read and feel things in those groups as well as in your life. And so they're very much a reflection. I've never really even thought about it in this way, how reflective they are of just how self-involved we are. And there's not one action that someone takes that shows, oh, this person's self-involved, this person isn't self-involved. Of course, it's a spectrum and a sensitivity, but no one necessarily ever knows what the best thing to say is. And it's always that clamping on to what the best thing to say, or what the right thing to say, or how I'm going to be seen. Oh, am I going to be seen in a certain way if I kind of lose my train of thought and just stop? And if you're concerned about that, you may just continue saying things with no relevance whatsoever to the situation because you're concerned about stopping at that point. Meanwhile, we do it all the time, both on either end of the spectrum. There's a number of times, being, I think, the host of the group, there's sort of a need to just say things when there's a space in there. And so it's been, especially, I know Ray's had lots of practice, but it's still a practice for him. I'm not going to assume that he's, got all this figured out necessarily, but for me, it's been just stepping in and being like, I have no fucking idea what I'm going to say in response to this, and just open my mouth and just keep talking and recognizing the inherent uncertain nature of reality helps with that a lot, because it allows you to step into things with not even conviction, but just step into things knowing that you can't know how it's going to be perceived. It's when we get caught up in thinking that there is a right thing to say or a right way of doing things that handcuffs ourselves, that kind of hinders ourselves from expressing what's right there all the time, and how willing you are to just step into something and just say something for the sake of saying it, not to validate yourself and not to be perceived in a certain way, but just express it because you're sensitive to the conversation and you're understanding, you have something that you want to share in response to that. It's just so reflective of our own lives and what we're going through in that. And it's, I think, a fantastic practice, whichever side of the spectrum you fall upon, the fear of being heard or the need to be heard. Both sides have their impacts in your own reality. And so the groups are a great way to practice being sensitive to, whichever side you tend to fall on.
So this is unrelated to the groups, but I want to bring it up because it's or somewhat related, I guess. But essentially sitting with silence, and you had maybe it was an Instagram post or something recently discussing that, and it's something that I've been chewing on as well. I mean, personally, I would say I used to fucking hate it. Like I would need music, need like whatever, essentially distraction, right? From like listening to the narrative, right? And then came a point where I was essentially only wanted silence, I guess, and I would want to go sit, watch a fucking pond of ducks and in like absolute silence. And like you definitely swing one way or the other, but I think some of it, to some extent, is essentially with people's just concern or need for certainty around what other people are thinking. And especially when often many of us aren't listening to thought, right? When we're in silence in general, right? So it's almost like when a person's like very addicted or attached to thought, right? They essentially like project their need to have an idea what the other person's thinking, and need to be engaged with them and things like that in trying to fill that silence. But yeah, I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on that subject.
I think that's really interesting. I think one of the benefits that I've found in sitting in silence was to recognize how much noise I was still attached to unconsciously. Because when you're in the silence, you're like, oh wow, those thoughts are right there. And it's because they always are. It's just that you're normally drowning them out. And so the silence is really just an opportunity to look at the noise that you're still invested in. Now the silence for me is actually silent. When I sit in the silence, there's no noise. And it's because I've spent the time to get familiar with the noise, to get familiar with where it was coming from, why I was creating it, why I even wanted to hear it, because those are all considerations. Often we feel like we are beset by all of these thoughts that we don't like, and we don't recognize that it's because of the attachments that we're still holding on to.
Yeah, it's almost like sitting through that, as you were saying, like the willingness to sit through the noise and let go of the concern about them, that allows you the silence to actually be silent. Because if you're sitting through that and you're hearing a bunch of noise and you think you shouldn't, and you can kind of like suppress that, but it's still gonna be there. So it has to be the willingness to hear it and just not overlay a concern about it. It's not about like silencing your mind. It's about dancing on top of all the bullshit that it's always going through all the time. Like that's what it does. It's a processing machine. It's a desiring to find certainty machine all the time. That's what it does. So there isn't a spot where your mind's just gonna like not be functional, because like that's not even what we want. We don't want an infunctional mind that doesn't work, that doesn't do anything. It's just a tool, and it's just how much overlaid concern we have about any thought that arises. But you have to be willing to hear them, to see them until you've gone through enough that and seeing them and not having concern about them that they don't have so much relevance anymore. And it's like they don't go away. You're just not concerned. That perspective shifts. And then it appears a lot quieter because the concern isn't there. So it's always the concern that arises about whatever situation comes up. And the idea that, oh, I thought I overcame this. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this anymore. Oh, I see myself in a certain way that doesn't involve this feeling or this thought or this situation. It's like there's something to let go of. There's something to look at. There's something to see and be willing to drop to a degree. Any idea of yourself that you're holding on to, because none of them are it. And so those thoughts arising and those feelings that we experience are always showing us what we're still holding on to if the concern arises on top of them.
That's funny. It's kind of funny because if you think about it, we're going through all of these thoughts, all of these attachments, all of this narrative. And then in order to find silence, we start thinking about it. And that makes about as much sense as screaming at the radio to try and turn it down. You're just adding more noise. You may as well just turn it down, right? But it's screaming at it. It's not going to do anything. Your opinion of the music doesn't do shit. Right? You're either going to do something about it or you're not. But that's it, is that we want to think about it and add to the noise because the alternative is letting go of the attachment that the noise comes from. And we would rather just avoid the process of change and say it's difficult than to allow ourselves to be the process of change that we would be otherwise. This has been a fantastic episode. Rainer, man, I'm so glad that you joined us for this episode. It was a pleasure to meet you at the last retreat. And as always, I love chatting with you in the groups. You are by far one of the more intelligent people within this conversation. You've been with us for a long time. And that is, in all honesty, where my concern for you came from, because it is so easy to be intelligent and so difficult to arrive as a result. And I have to say that you have come in leaps and bounds to where you are. It is a pleasure to know you. And I am very grateful for you being on the show and within our community.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm pumped to check out another retreat ASAP.
Fuck yeah. I've always loved chatting with you, Rainer. You bring so much insight and just so much in general to the table. So it was awesome having you at the last retreat. I'm really glad we were able to have this conversation with you. I mean, this is a lot of fun. This was a very, I don't know, just seemed like a very relevant conversation right now, at least for me, and just what we've been talking about in our groups and what everyone else has been sharing. So I appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate everyone else for tuning in to this one. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.